The great crystal dome of Nexus Prime sparkled like a giant jewel floating in space. Inside its massive halls, beings from across the galaxy had come together for what everyone knew might be their last free meeting. The air itself seemed to buzz with fear and anger as 47 different species filled the enormous chamber. At the very center of this grand space, the Zephyrians stood like living glass towers. Their bodies caught the light and threw it back in cold, beautiful colors that somehow made everyone else feel small and afraid. These ancient beings had ruled the galaxy's heart for longer than most species had existed, and today they were here to make sure everyone remembered that fact. Ambassador Kim Ji-won sat in the human section, far from the center where the important species had their places. She wore a simple gray uniform that looked plain next to the elaborate robes and armor of other delegates. Her hands moved carefully over her papers, checking each page one more time. Humans had only been part of the galactic community for 30 years, barely a moment to species that counted time in millennia. The largest Zephyrian rose from its crystal throne. Its body stretched 3 meters high, catching and bending light like a living prism. When it raised what might have been an arm, every sound in the chamber died away. The time of chaos ends today, the being announced. Its voice came through translation devices in dozens of different languages, but the cold authority needed no translation. For 10,000 years, the Zephyrian Empire has brought peace and order to the core worlds. Now we extend this gift to all. Kim Ji-won felt her jaw muscles tighten. She had read the reports about Zephyrian gifts to other worlds. The Altani people had refused such generosity just 5 years ago. Now their beautiful homeworld was nothing but bare rock, and the survivors worked in deep space mining stations, digging metals for their new masters. Every species here will accept our protection, the Zephyrian continued. You will pay reasonable tribute and follow reasonable laws. In return, you will enjoy the peace that comes from proper guidance. Those who choose to refuse. The being paused, letting silence carry the threat. Well, you have seen what happens to the stubborn. One by one, the proud species of the galaxy stood to surrender their freedom. The vegans, master builders who could construct cities in the hearts of stars, spoke their acceptance through gritted teeth. The Aquarians, whose songs could carry messages across entire solar systems, whispered their agreement with voices that shook with shame. Even the fierce Drakmari warriors, who had never bowed to anyone, slowly nodded their great scaled heads in defeat. When the Zephyrians' attention turned to the human section, Kim Ji-won rose from her chair. Her movements were calm and steady, showing none of the fear that filled the chamber like smoke. And what of the young mammals from the small yellow star? The Zephyrian asked. Its tone suggested it was discussing something it might scrape off its crystalline foot. Surely even you can understand simple reality. Kim Ji-won looked directly into the being's magnificent eyes. The Terran Federation requests time to discuss these terms with our government. The sound that came from the Zephyrian delegation was like wind chimes made of ice, their version of laughter. Discuss? Little mammals, you have given the galaxy nothing but simple tools and basic services. What wisdom could your primitive minds possibly offer? Even so, Kim Ji-won replied, her voice never changing from its polite, professional tone, we ask for the standard 72 hours that galactic law allows for such important decisions. The prime speaker waved one gleaming appendage as if brushing away an annoying insect. Very well. Take your time to accept the inevitable. This session ends. As beings began filing out of the chamber, many stopped near the human section. Some looked at Kim Ji-won with pity, as if she were a child who didn't understand that the game was over. Others seemed curious about what the humans might possibly say when their time was up. A few whispered among themselves, wondering if the mammals were brave or simply too stupid to understand what was happening. Admiral Park Min-ho, the senior military advisor in the human delegation, moved closer to Kim Ji-won as they gathered their belongings. To anyone watching, he appeared to be helping organize papers and data pads. But his lips barely moved as he spoke. The ships are already moving, he whispered so quietly that even the best alien hearing couldn't catch his words. Operation Silent Dawn begins now. Kim Ji-won gave the smallest possible nod, barely more than a slight tilt of her head. Then she continued packing her papers with the same careful, methodical movements she had used throughout the entire session. Each document was placed precisely in its proper spot. Each datapad was secured exactly as regulations required. To the watching aliens, she looked like a bureaucrat doing paperwork. They had no way of knowing that they were watching the beginning of something that would shake their galaxy to its very foundations. The humans were leaving, but not in the way anyone expected. As the last delegates filed out of the Great Chamber, Kim Ji-won took one final look around the crystal dome that had housed galactic democracy for centuries. Tomorrow, it would become the center of an empire built on fear and submission. Unless, of course, someone chose to change the game entirely. She picked up her modest briefcase and walked toward the exit, her footsteps echoing softly in the vast empty space. 71 hours had passed since the Zephyrians had given their ultimatum. Kim Ji-won walked back into the great crystal chamber of Nexus Prime, her steps as calm and measured as they had been 3 days before. The massive space hummed with nervous energy as delegates from across the galaxy waited to hear humanity's answer. Most of the alien representatives sat forward in their seats, expecting the humans to do what everyone else had done, bow their heads and accept their new masters. Some whispered among themselves about how the mammals would phrase their surrender. A few wondered if the humans might try to bargain for better terms, though everyone knew the Zephyrians never negotiated. The crystalline beings at the center of the chamber glowed with satisfaction. Their victory was so certain they had already begun discussing how to divide up human territories among themselves. Earth itself might make a pleasant vacation world once the primitive inhabitants were relocated to more suitable locations. Kim Ji-won reached the speaking platform and set down her simple briefcase. She opened it with the same careful movement she always used, withdrew a single sheet of paper, and looked up at the waiting assembly. The Terran Federation has carefully considered the generous offer presented by the Zephyrian Empire, she began, her clear voice carrying to every corner of the vast chamber. After full consultation with our government and people, we must respectfully decline tributary status. A wave of surprised murmurs swept through the assembly. This was not the answer anyone had expected. Even defiance usually came with angry speeches or dramatic gestures. The human ambassador spoke as if she were declining an invitation to dinner. But Kim Ji-won was not finished speaking. Furthermore, the Terran Federation hereby withdraws from the Galactic Council, effective immediately. We will no longer participate in these proceedings or recognize the authority of this body over human affairs. We wish you all success in your future endeavors. Now the chamber exploded into chaos. Representatives leaped to their feet, shouting questions and protests in dozens of languages. The translation system struggled to keep up with the sudden flood of voices. Some aliens demanded to know what the humans thought they were doing. Others called them insane for choosing certain death over reasonable submission. The Zephyrian delegation pulsed with waves of angry light that painted the chamber walls in shifting colors of rage. The prime speaker rose to its full 3-meter height, its crystalline body blazing like a star. Foolish mammals, its voice boomed over the chaos. You choose extinction over wisdom. Your pathetic species will be dust within a year. Kim Ji-won stood quietly in the center of the storm, waiting for the noise to die down. When the prime speaker finished its threat, she picked up her briefcase and slung it over her shoulder. Then she looked up at the towering crystal being with the same polite expression she had worn throughout the entire proceedings. We choose to find our own path, she said simply. I wish you all well in yours. Without another word, she turned and walked toward the exit. Admiral Park Min-ho and the other members of the human delegation fell into step behind her, their formation as precise as a military unit. Behind them, the shouting grew even louder, but not one of the humans looked back or quickened their pace. The aliens were so focused on the drama in the main chamber that they missed what was happening throughout the rest of Nexus Prime. In the commercial district, Lee Sunyo finished packing the last items from his small shop that sold rare earth spices to curious alien customers. He had been quietly closing down for 2 days, telling anyone who asked that he was taking a vacation. Now he sealed the empty store and walked calmly toward the docking bays. 3 levels down, Dr. Choi Minji was completing her own preparations in the medical research facility where she had worked for 5 years. She had spent the last 71 hours carefully copying all her research data onto secure drives while simultaneously wiping every trace of human medical knowledge from the station's computers. Her alien colleagues thought she was simply updating files. They had no idea that centuries of human medical advances were disappearing from their databases forever. In the engineering sections, Yoon Dae-hyun was running final security protocols on the maintenance systems he had quietly improved over the past decade. To any observer, it looked like routine computer work. In reality, he was ensuring that every piece of human technology would stop working the moment the last human left the station. The aliens had grown so used to their systems running smoothly that they had forgotten who kept them that way. All across Nexus Prime, similar scenes were playing out. Human teachers gathered their lesson plans and disappeared from alien schools. Human technicians finished their shifts and never came back. Human merchants closed their stalls and loaded their goods onto unmarked freighters. Human doctors completed their final patient visits and sealed their medical supplies. By the time Kim Ji-won's shuttle cleared the station's docking bay, Every human civilian was either gone or in the process of leaving. The pattern was repeating itself across hundreds of stations, thousands of worlds, wherever humanity had established even the smallest presence during their 30 years in galactic civilization. The aliens had grown comfortable with humans being everywhere, fixing things that broke, solving problems that seemed impossible, providing the countless small services that kept their complex society running smoothly. Humans were so common, so helpful, so quietly essential that most species barely noticed them anymore. Now, like leaves blown away by an autumn wind, they were simply vanishing. The galaxy would soon learn just how much they had taken for granted. 3 months had passed since the humans walked away from the Galactic Council. At first, most species had barely noticed their absence. Life went on as usual across thousands of worlds. The Zephyrians were busy setting up their new tribute systems, and everyone else was trying to adjust to their new reality as subjects rather than free beings. Then the machines started breaking. It began small, as these things always do. On the Vegan Consortium's main industrial world, Chief Engineer Veltar was reviewing the daily production reports when he noticed something odd. The quantum foundries that created their most advanced materials were running slightly slower than usual. Nothing dramatic, just a small decrease in efficiency that most engineers would have ignored. But Veltar had been building things for over 2 centuries. He knew that small problems had a way of becoming big problems if you didn't fix them quickly. So he sent a team to check the foundries, expecting to find a loose connection or a worn component that needed replacement. What they found was much worse. The foundries had stopped working entirely. Not just running slow, completely dead. The massive machines that could reshape matter at the atomic level now sat silent and cold, their quantum fields collapsed, their production lines empty. Veltar rushed to the main foundry with his assistant, a young engineer named Kreltas who had always been good with complex systems. Together, they stared at the banks of dead machinery that represented the heart of their civilization's manufacturing power. How is this possible? Veltar muttered, his 8 arms waving in confusion as he examined the control systems. These foundries have run for 50 years without a major failure. The error correction systems should have prevented any cascade shutdown. Kreltas was hunched over a diagnostic panel, his large eyes scanning through streams of error messages. Sir, he said slowly, the error correction systems are what failed. They just stopped working. All at once. That's impossible. Those systems were built by our best engineers. They were foolproof. No sir, Kreltas said, his voice growing smaller as he read more of the diagnostic data. They weren't built by our engineers. They were built by humans. Veltar felt a cold sensation in his gut. What do you mean? The humans always said they were just making small improvements to our systems. Better efficiency here, fewer errors there. We thought they were adding little helper programs to our existing technology. Kreltas turned to face his boss, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and amazement. But they weren't adding to our systems, sir. They were replacing them. Piece by piece, over 30 years, they quietly swapped out our technology with their own. Veltar's 8 arms went completely still, something that only happened when he was truly shocked. How much of our infrastructure? Kreltas looked back at his diagnostics, then at the dead foundries, then at the other machinery throughout the facility that was starting to show similar problems. All of it, sir. Every critical system has some human component that we never noticed because everything still looked the same from the outside. The same conversation was happening on worlds across the galaxy. Species that had thought humans were just helpful assistants were discovering that their entire civilizations had become dependent on human technology and expertise. On the agricultural worlds of the Altarian Republic, Farmer Zekon stood in his fields watching his crops wither and die. These fields had produced record harvests for the past 15 years, ever since a quiet human scientist named Dr. Nam Yunji had suggested some minor genetic adjustments to help the Earth crops grow better in alien soil. Now, without the constant monitoring and adjustment that Dr. Nam had provided, the delicate balance she had created was falling apart. The plants that had seemed so robust were revealing themselves to be completely dependent on treatments that only she had understood. Zekon's family had farmed these lands for generations, but now he was facing the prospect of watching his world starve because a human woman was no longer there to tend to modifications he hadn't even known existed. Far across the galaxy, the Aquarians were discovering their own version of the same problem. Their deep space communication network had been the pride of their civilization for centuries. Using quantum entanglement, they could send messages instantly across vast distances, allowing their far-flung colonies to stay in contact as if they were in the same room. But now the network was failing. Messages that should have taken seconds to transmit were taking hours. Some communications were arriving garbled or not at all. The beautiful quantum harmony that had connected their entire species was slowly falling apart. Communications specialist Lyraneth had spent days trying to find the problem when she discovered the truth in an old maintenance log. 5 years ago, a human technician named Kang Jinsu had performed what was listed as routine calibration on their quantum arrays. The work had seemed so minor that most Aquarians had forgotten it ever happened. But Kang Jinsu had actually rewritten the timing algorithms that kept their quantum entanglements stable. Without his constant fine-tuning, the delicate quantum states were slowly drifting out of sync. The Aquarians had the most advanced communication technology in the galaxy, but they were about to lose the ability to talk to their own colonies. The most frightening reports came from the outer rim of the galaxy, where the Drakmari warrior clan stood guard against ancient threats that lurked in the darkness between stars. Their early warning systems had protected galactic civilization for thousands of years, detecting any movement from the hostile regions where old enemies waited for signs of weakness. Now those warning systems were going dark, one by one. Warrior Chief Skarneth received the reports with growing dread. The sensor networks, the analysis computers, the threat assessment systems, all had human components that were slowly failing. The Drakmari, who prided themselves on being the galaxy's protectors, were being struck blind just when they needed their sight most. Even the mighty Zephyrian Empire was beginning to feel the effects. Their vast administrative network, which managed tribute collection and resource distribution across hundreds of worlds, was slowing down like an ancient machine running out of power. Calculations that should have taken minutes were taking hours. Communications between worlds were suffering delays that grew longer each day. The galaxy was slowly grinding to a halt, and everyone was beginning to understand the same terrible truth: the humans hadn't just been helpful neighbors. They had quietly become the invisible foundation that held galactic civilization together. And now that foundation was gone. 8 months had passed since the humans walked away from the galaxy, and now the great crystal chamber of Nexus Prime looked like a place where hope had come to die. The same delegates who had once sat proudly in their assigned seats now huddled together like refugees, their faces marked by fear and desperation that grew stronger with each passing day. The emergency session had been called because things were getting worse faster than anyone had imagined possible. What had started as minor system failures was now threatening the complete collapse of galactic civilization. Representatives from across the known worlds had gathered to share their growing list of disasters, hoping someone might have found a solution that could save them all. Ambassador Krelton of the Vegan Consortium stood at the speaking platform, but he looked nothing like the proud industrial leader who had attended the first meeting months ago. His skin, which should have displayed the bright colors of confidence and success, now flickered with the pale, shifting patterns that his species showed when facing disaster. "We have lost 60% of our manufacturing ability," he announced, his voice hollow with defeat. "Our great factory worlds that once built ships and cities for half the galaxy now sit in darkness. The power systems that have run our civilization for centuries are failing in ways our best engineers cannot understand or fix." He gestured with one of his 4 arms toward a holographic display that showed the slow death of vegan industry. "We have found 17 major system failures that we cannot repair. Every time our technicians try to fix one problem, they discover that the humans had changed things so deeply that we would need to rebuild our entire civilization from the beginning just to understand what they did." The Aquarian delegate rose next, her normally beautiful singing voice now carrying notes of grief that made everyone in the chamber feel sad just listening to her. The Aquarians communicated through song, and their music could carry emotions as clearly as words carried meaning. "The great symphony that connected our worlds is breaking," she sang in tones that spoke of loss and loneliness. "Each day, more of our colonies fall silent. We who once could speak to any world in our territory as easily as talking to someone in the same room now struggle to send messages to our closest neighbors. The quantum networks that were the pride of our people are dying, and we do not know how to heal them." But it was when Skarnex took the platform that real terror entered the chamber. The Drakmari war chief was a massive being covered in scales that told the story of 100 battles. Scars crisscrossed his hide like a map of violence, and his reptilian eyes had seen things that would give nightmares to most other species. When a warrior like Skarnex looked afraid, everyone else knew they should be terrified. "The ancient enemies are moving," he growled, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent his life defending others from threats they could barely imagine. "The Devourers, who we have kept locked away in the dark spaces beyond our borders for 5,000 years, are testing our defenses again." He paused, letting his words sink in. Everyone in the galaxy knew about the Devourers, even if most preferred not to think about them. They were creatures of pure hunger that consumed entire worlds, leaving nothing behind but empty space where civilizations had once thrived. Only the constant vigilance of warriors like the Drakmari had kept them at bay. They have learned what we are only now discovering, Scarnex continued. Our early warning systems, our defense networks, our ability to coordinate responses across multiple worlds, all of it depended on human technology and human knowledge that we never recognized because it was hidden so well. The chamber fell completely silent. Even the quiet humming of the station's life support systems seemed to fade as everyone focused on the war chief's next words. Yesterday, they destroyed a border fortress on Kepler 442c, he said, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. A military base with 10,000 warriors and enough firepower to level a moon. We received no warning that they were coming. No distress signal when the attack began. We only learned about it when supply ships arrived and found empty space where our fortress should have been. The implications hit the assembly like a physical blow. If the Devourers could destroy major military installations without anyone even knowing they were under attack, then nowhere in the galaxy was safe. The defensive systems that had protected them for millennia were blind and deaf, leaving them helpless against enemies that had been waiting centuries for exactly this kind of opportunity. At the center of the chamber, Prime Speaker Zathek of the Zephyrian Empire sat in stunned silence. The crystalline being that had once proclaimed the dawn of eternal Zephyrian rule now watched his empire crumble faster than the civilizations he had tried to conquer. His tribute worlds were in open revolt as their economies collapsed. His core systems were experiencing power shortages for the first time in 1,000 years. Even his capital world was running on emergency power as the vast computer networks that managed Zephyrian society began failing one by one. The empire that was supposed to bring order to the galaxy was falling apart more quickly than the chaos it had tried to replace. And somewhere in the darkness beyond the rim, ancient enemies were stirring, sensing weakness like predators catching the scent of wounded prey. The galaxy that had dismissed humanity as a minor species providing simple services was learning that they had actually been the invisible threads holding everything together. Without those threads, the beautiful tapestry of galactic civilization was unraveling into chaos. And everyone was beginning to wonder if it was already too late to stop the collapse. 1 year and 7 days after the humans had vanished from galactic civilization, a small ship appeared at the edge of Nexus Prime's sensor range. Administrator Velketh, the Zephyrian commander who now ran the dying station, stared at his screens in complete disbelief. The ship was nothing special, just a simple diplomatic vessel with basic engines and no weapons. But it was flying human identification codes and politely requesting permission to dock, as if the entire galaxy hadn't spent the last year falling apart without them. Around the galaxy, entire civilizations were collapsing into darkness. The Devourer fleets had emerged from the void between stars, consuming 3 entire border systems before disappearing back into the black. Whole species were abandoning their advanced technology and returning to primitive ways of life because their modern systems had failed beyond any hope of repair. And now a human ship was asking for docking permission like they were arriving for a routine diplomatic meeting. Granted immediately, Velketh ordered his staff, his crystalline form pulsing with desperate hope. Give them full diplomatic honors. Everything they request. The ship that docked was small and carried only 3 passengers. Ambassador Kim Ji-won stepped out first, looking exactly as she had when she walked away from the council a year ago. Her gray uniform was pressed and neat, her movements calm and professional, and she carried the same modest briefcase she had always used. Behind her came Admiral Park Min-ho, the military advisor who had whispered about moving ships during that final council session. The third person was someone Velketh didn't recognize, Dr. Song Hyojin, listed on the passenger manifest simply as technical advisor. Kim Ji-won accepted the hastily arranged escort to the council chambers as if she had never left. She walked through the corridors of Nexus Prime with the same measured pace she had always used, showing no reaction to the obvious signs of decay and system failures that now marked the once proud station. Within hours, an emergency session of the Galactic Council had been called. Representatives from every surviving species rushed to attend, many arriving in ships that barely held together long enough to make the journey. The great crystal chamber that had once been a symbol of galactic unity now felt like a shelter for refugees, filled with desperate beings whose worlds were dying around them. The chamber that had once buzzed with the confident voices of proud civilizations was now eerily quiet. Delegates sat in their assigned sections, but many of those sections were now empty. Some species had simply stopped communicating with the outside galaxy as their technology failed. Others had been consumed by the advancing Devourers. A few had collapsed into civil wars as their societies broke down without the invisible human support systems they had never known existed. Kim Ji-won walked to the central speaking platform with the same steady pace she had used during humanity's departure. She set down her briefcase, opened it with careful movements, and withdrew a single sheet of paper. Then she looked up at the assembled representatives with the calm, professional expression that had never changed throughout all the chaos. The Terran Federation has been observing the recent difficulties experienced by galactic civilization, she began, her clear voice carrying easily through the hushed chamber. After careful study, we have concluded that the previous system of governance has proven to be inadequate for the needs of our galactic community. The words were so mild, so understated, that they would have been funny if they weren't being spoken to an audience that was facing complete extinction. Inadequate seemed like a very gentle way to describe the total collapse of everything they had built over thousands of years. During our year away from galactic affairs, we have spent our time developing new approaches to cooperation between species, Kim Ji-won continued. We have created models based on mutual benefit rather than conquest, on shared responsibility rather than tribute systems, and on recognizing that every civilization, no matter how young or seemingly unimportant, contributes essential elements to galactic stability. She paused, letting her words settle over the desperate assembly like a gentle rain on parched earth. We are prepared to share these new developments with you, she said. We are also ready to provide the technical assistance needed to restore the systems that are currently failing across your worlds. However, participation in this new approach will require certain commitments from everyone involved. Prime Speaker Zarthek of the Zephyrian Empire, his crystalline form now dim with exhaustion and defeat, leaned forward in his seat. The being who had once demanded tribute from the entire galaxy now spoke with the voice of someone begging for help. What do you require from us? He asked. Kim Ji-won looked directly at him, and for a moment her professional expression softened slightly. We require partnership, not domination. We need cooperation, not conquest. We ask for respect, not submission. Dr. Song Hyojin stepped forward and activated a small device that filled the chamber with holographic displays showing complex diagrams and statistical models. We never actually left, she announced calmly, as if she were discussing the weather. Human observation teams have been monitoring every system failure, recording every collapse, and studying every problem that has occurred over the past year. The holographic displays showed the intricate web of connections that linked every aspect of galactic civilization, trade routes, communication networks, defense systems, resource distribution. All of it was mapped in perfect detail, with human contributions highlighted in soft blue light. We now understand galactic civilization better than it has ever understood itself, Dr. Song continued. We know exactly what went wrong, why it went wrong, and how to fix it. But more importantly, we know how to build something better. The display shifted, showing new configurations where every species played multiple important roles, where backup systems prevented total failures, and where cooperation was rewarded rather than punished. The Terran Federation offers to serve as coordinators while these new systems are established, Kim Ji-won said. But our goal is not to rule. Our goal is to help you build something that works for everyone, and then step back and let you manage it yourselves. For the first time in a year, hope began to flicker in the great chamber of Nexus Prime.